Okay, I'm ready to go. I'm George Smith. I'm the moderator of this discussion book group on the Fountainhead. This is the first of 17. Let me just say very briefly, well, with David Kelly here, he would be the real expert, I think, on this book. But I first read the Fountainhead when I was in college. It would have been about 1969. I read all of Rand's nonfiction in high school. I never was much reader, although I enjoy reading it. To me, it's more of a luxury. I have so much nonfiction I have to read for my work. And since that time, I've read it. Well, I've read it 3 times altogether up until this point, and of course, I'm rereading it for this discussion group. The last time was about 15 years ago, so it was a while since I'd read the book. And it was interesting rereading it, how many details I had forgotten. I've always been interested in Ayn Rand as a writer, just in terms of how careful she is. Little things, even in the first 3 chapters, which is what we'll be covering. And I hope we can touch on some of those. Anyway, enough about me. To start this off, I sent a question to Nicole. I thought it might be interesting to start off with just one question to sort of focus the group. And I tried to think of something for the reading group. And I must say, a number of people replied with very interesting responses. I was sort of hoping some of those people would be here. But anyway, it's a very short thing. Here's the question I posed. The first 2 lines of the Fountainhead are as follows. Howard Dwork laughed. He stood naked at the edge of a cliff. Ayn Rand was an extraordinarily careful writer, and she obviously gave a lot of thought to these opening lines. Why do you suppose that Rand chose these 2 lines to open her novel, Rourke? And with that, I'm curious what you guys have to say. Don't talk all at once.
Mark.
Well, that really sparked a lot of interesting comments. All of the comments on the Facebook page were almost all good. One person said, because he liked to take his clothes off, which I didn't think quite answered the question, as I'd hoped it would.
Well, I can think of one is that the nude in art, I know it from the visual arts, is a symbol of your authentic, unique character, where when you have subjects that are all dressed up in clothes, it makes them from the 80s or from Elizabethan times or from something like that. When you're naked, you're just a human soul, but you're also unique.
Interesting points. One of the commentators on the Facebook page said that nakedness, such as the story of Adam and Eve, was a sign of innocence. And that Miranda may have had something in mind like that. I don't know, but I thought it was an interesting point.
Mm-hmm.
I said this on the Facebook
is Jennifer
page,
Grossman.
Jag?
Go ahead. Hi, is that Eric?
No, that's Michael.
Oh, okay. And then somebody else was about to talk.
Is this Jennifer?
Oh.
Yes, hi.
Jennifer Grossman, right? That Jennifer.
Mark, we can't hear you.
Is Mark trying to talk? I can't see the screen since I'm not at a computer, but is someone trying to talk and not getting any audio?
Yeah, someone was doing pantomime.
Well, as they're figuring out how to unmute themselves, I was just thinking about envy, and I was thinking about some of these emotions that we are ashamed of, either because of cultural norms or because we just know that they're coming from a baser place, and how we have to dress up these attitudes and emotions as virtues, as sort of something more exalted and something more flattering to our ego. And the fact that he does not have to wear any disguise, that he accepts himself as he is, I think is just a frank portrayal of who he is as a person. I mean, he's not even a man yet. He's just a teenager.
Well, I thought he was in his early 20s at this point, but I could be wrong. But
He's 22. He's 22.
Oh, really? Okay. One thing I've noticed is, first of all, in connection with what Jennifer said, is that Rourke is very casual about it, the way he dresses. Even when he went in to see the dean, Keating, well, there's that comment, there's that discussion with Mrs. Keating. You know, she says, "Aren't you? You're going to wear those?" He's the dean. He says, "Well, not anymore. He's not." But another thing I noticed was, I think it's the beginning of chapter 3, where Keating is just gotten to New York to take the job with Francon. The first thing he notices are the way people dress, and he admires it, envies it, like it's important to him. And he doesn't notice the skyscrapers or the magnificence of the city. He notices that guys are wearing nice suits. A nice little touch, I thought.
Very, yeah. Good. George, going back to the first line, he laughed.
Yeah.
I found that actually odd because I didn't find Rourke funny at all.
In fact, there's a comment.
Joy in the novel.
I agree, and it's interesting because at some point he's having that discussion with Keating. It's after the commencement, and the mother interrupts at some point. But at one point, when Keating says something fairly honest, it says, "Well, Rourke had this sort of gentle, benevolent laugh," something he rarely did. Rand even mentions that he's not, he doesn't laugh that often. So I just thought it's an interesting opening line. Howard Rourke laughed, I think is the exact way it's put. But it's a very interesting way of presenting the character, I thought. There's another side to him.
So there's a leitmotif, a choice that Rand makes over and over in her novels, which is that the hero, when confronted with the psychological challenge that they recognize that there's something that they need to do. There's something that they need to understand, but they don't have time for it now. And then they get distracted with some challenge in their process, and so they put off the realization until the end of the novel. In the conversation with the dean, Rourke says, there's something about how the dean thinks. He's run across these people before. He knows that what he does is different than them, and he does not understand them, and he really should understand that at some point.
Right.
And Dagny does that, and Reardon does that. It's a common repeating theme. And if you take that second line, which is that there's a world to beyond him that he's about to engage in, that in the process of engaging in, he's going to have the profound experience that he's wanting. That is his character. But he laughs. His relationship to that unknown is one of joyous power. Jennifer suggested without shame that the thing about being naked in the face of the unknown and being comfortable in being naked, he is unashamedly Howard Rourke. And Howard Rourke, his fundamental relationship to joyous, frivolous laugh. It's the laugh of the artist who knows that he is and that it's that kind of joy. And he's naked in the face of the unknown that he's about to dive into. So anyway, that's what I got from your question.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I should recognize the voice. Who just said that? It was very good. I wonder.
Mark.
It was Mark Lewis, back from the Atlantis days, George.
Okay. Well put. By the way, you mentioned the dean. Now, maybe, I hope I didn't miss something, but I even checked a couple of times. As far as I can tell, he never has a name. He's never given like Jones or Dean, whatever. He's just the dean. Even when Mrs. Rourke, the mother, talks about him, it's just the dean. Now, I thought someone like Rand, that just wouldn't be an accident. I mean, if you're going to develop characters, even minor characters, you're going to give them a name. And yet, throughout those first 2 chapters, unless somebody can tell me, I'm wrong, that he is named at some point, it's just the Dean. And I was curious why she did that. Does anybody, does that strike anybody else that he doesn't actually have a name, just a title?
Sorry, just to build on that, I could be mistaken, but I also think that Mrs. Keating is not given a first name in the novel.
Well, that's true. But she's not given a title either. I was wondering if he's meant to represent kind of just this general authority figure who expects people to defer to him. And there had to, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I thought it was odd. I mean, it's not even a last name. It's not a first name. It's just a title at all. But I thought, given how careful Rand was with her characters, I thought, I wonder what she was thinking when she decided not to give him a name at all.
It would be the status quo.
Right.
So
right.
Not one doing. All they are is their job as the dean.
Right.
Well, I mean, it's not unheard of for minor characters like that in a novel to not be given a name, because I mean, it's not particularly important that we know what his name is.
That's
we
true.
just need to know that he's the dean.
That could be the explanation. Yeah.
But George, if I could, David here, if I could pitch in, I never thought about that. It's a really interesting question. He is characterized. There's that line, a great man thought the dean or a group of either. And I mean, that is a wonderful line, because it sort of tells you everything about his learned to call social metaphysics. The fact that he's simply defined by convention. But there are repeated references to the dean all through the novel, the principle behind the dean. I mean, they struggles with understanding the mentality that the dean has, and that Keating has, and to an extent. So I don't know. That doesn't give me an answer to your question. It's just, but it means this is not a cameo appearance in the novel.
I think I might have a suggestion. I think it might simply be because he refers to it as the principle behind the dean, because to Howard Rourke, the dean is not a real person. He's a construct, basically, as this person who represents this principle, who he's kind of noticed in other people up until now, comes to think of him as the person who embodies it, and who he is outside of that isn't really important to Rourke, which means it shouldn't really be important to us.
I think you've got something there. Yeah.
I can pitch in for a moment. To me, the dean, they refer to him as the authority of architecture at this point, and figures of authority are commonly known by their titles more than by their names. The president, the secretary of state, the sheriff, the chief of police, the tax collector. The position represents the authority more than the name does.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right.
And I'll highlight what Barry said. If the dean, right, then Keating's mother is the generic mother. There is no other mother in the story. She is.
Yeah, I found her one of the most annoying characters in the Fountainhead.
Yeah, well, probably a bit autobiographical from Rand's perspective.
Yeah, a little passive, I think is how we'd call her today. But listen, I hope if I can. This is not something I would normally do, especially with you people. You're very familiar with the book, but I just can't resist quoting these few lines. The reason I'm doing this is I remember back in college, I just laughed when I read this. and it's still probably my favorite passage in all of the Fountainhead. I just couldn't remember exactly where it appeared, and of course I ran across it in just the first few pages of the Stanton Institute of Technology. And
Yeah.
you remember that? She says, I'll just read this briefly. It looked like a medieval fortress with a Gothic cathedral grafted to its belly. The fortress was eminently suited to its purpose, with stout brick walls, a few slits wide enough for sentries, ramparts behind which standing archers could hide, and corner turrets from which boiling oil could be poured upon the attacker, should such an emergency arise in an institute of learning. I remember laughing.
Yeah, so it's like it embodies everything that Howard Roark thinks is wrong with architecture.
Exactly. And it's not only in Fountainhead, well, especially in the Fountainhead, that are quite humorous. They're her descriptions of things. And I've talked to people who don't think Rand ever had a sense of humor, or there's any humor in her books. Well, certainly there is in passages like that. The idea of pour boiling oil on attackers, it's just a beautiful image.
Yeah,
That
she
was
definitely. She definitely had a sense of humor, but it was always directed at the bad people in the novel as opposed to the good people. I mean, the only time I can remember a hero in Rand's novel being kind of the butt of the joke is when Dagny Taggart is asking all the people in the Gulch what their job was, and she says to the truck driver, "What were you? And are you a professor of philology or something?" And he goes, "No, ma'am, I'm a truck driver." So.
Yeah.
Adele, you wanted.
I was just going to say that the humor is one of the things I noticed most when going back and rereading this for the 10th time, where Howard Roark meets Henry Cameron for the first time is, I think, one of the funniest things that Rand has ever written. I'll kill you if you go to anyone else, and that whole exchange was just so funny.
Yeah.
I think she had enough credit for being as funny as she was.
I at least wanted to mention it because there's so much discussion about it. We're not talking about the movie version, but if anyone wants the movie version in contrast to the book, that's fine. It seems to be something that might be interesting to discuss. Of course, Rand herself, but anyway, I thought I'd just mention that. So.
He totally ruins the speech at the end.
Oh, it's awful. I mean, it's almost like doesn't understand what he's saying. And
yeah, he's like stepping over his words, and it's just not good.
Yeah. I liked him as an actor generally, but like in westerns, are kind of a good guy type. I just didn't think the character of Roark he really got in some ways.
Yeah, he was good at being kind of the one-note tough guy, but he wasn't really suited for a role that's as dynamic as the Howard Roark character.
Yeah, I agree. I remember years ago, this goes back to the 60s, when they had those afternoon talks. I forget the guy's name. It's not well known today. He had the actress Patricia Neal on, and he asked her what her worst role was, the role she most regretted, and she said the role of Dominique in The Fountainhead, which is neither here nor there, but apparently, maybe the political stuff in it bothered her. I don't really understand that, but I watched that recently with Marilyn, and I have mixed reactions to that movie every time I see it. Rand is, I think, one of those writers that reads well, but he's hard to speak in terms of dialogue. So anyway, back to the book. Nobody else wants to say something about the movie.
Sorry, I just wanted to say I haven't seen Patricia O'Neill in any other films, but I would be surprised if she ever gave a performance as bad as the one she gave in The Fountainhead. So that might be the reason why it's her most regretted.
It's okay, but you didn't like her in that.
Let's not have a discussion about that. We're meant to be here talking about the book after all.
Okay. Before I go on, anyone else want to bring up anything about what these first three chapters, what they noticed?
So one of the of the parts that I thought was most telling in terms of the psychological difference between Rourke and Keating is this the first scene with the mother. Keating is talking with Rourke and it's going quite well. The mother comes into the scene as it's described. Keating can never be the same with an audience. And his mom says, "Well, I guess you don't want my opinion. I'll leave it to you. Let me leave." And Keating's all, "Yes, please leave. I want you to leave. I don't want to talk with you. I do not want to hear your opinion. Please, God, not your opinion. I cannot." Yes, of course I want your opinion.
Right.
And then she says, you know, if you don't choose somebody else, and he's going to be considered to be the best of his class, and he's going to choose Schlenker. He's like, oh, not Schlenker. I've been working to beat Schlenker my entire life as being better than this other person, and I might lose. And it was just such a clear insight into this human dominance, hierarchy, status, tendency. Who am I in the group? What kind of power do I have in the group? And if I can just be better. And it was just, I thought, so artfully crafted, that particular moment where she says, yes, Schlenker. And it's like, oh!
That's a good thing.
Well, that's something.
Go ahead.
That's something she does so well in writing, which I don't think shows up in the movie, is that Rand sets up the context so beautifully, so that when she has a last word, the context has already been set up perfectly, so that the whole thing really resonates. Where in the movies, it's not always. It seems like it's coming out of the blue. Sometimes there are comments, like what? Where's the comment coming from?
Well, I mean, Keating suffers as a result of that. But one thing that I thought was really good in that scene was how relieved he is when Howard Rourke with his mother. So.
Oh yeah, for different reasons, but yeah. You know, one thing I wanted to mention, but there's a very good chapter in the book, The Art of Fiction. I think it's in the chapter called Characterization, which is worth it if you haven't read it, because Rand goes into considerable detail about the dialogue between Keating and Rourke and how if she had changed a few lines, it would have really changed the character. I won't go into details here, but I recommend you all look at that because she considers, well, what if Rourke is parts of life, you know? And it's a very interesting discussion. She was very self-aware, obviously. But and she compares that sort of dialogue with a kind of similar dialogue in Aerosmith, in Sinclair Lewis's Aerosmith. She apparently liked, and David, I think you probably know more about this than I do, but she apparently liked Sinclair Lewis on some level, but she considered him a naturalist. And she criticizes a lot of the naturalists for only being very superficial in their analysis of these other characters. She wanted to go to the depths and find the core. But I don't know, has anybody not read The Art of Fiction by Rand? So you all have?
Well, Adele, you have to read it. It's great.
It's on my list. It's on my Amazon list. That's my next one.
Okay. Well, it's based on
Adele, I recommend it. It's I was looking at it, George. You know, before the as you were setting up this reading group, and and you know about Rand's concern for going to the depth of and in Keating's case, the you know the exchange in the first chapter with the mother is, you know, perfectly revealing, as Mark was saying, but also in chapter 3 when he's going to meet Francon for the first time. I mean, the first meeting with the big boss.
Right.
I'd be curious what people saw in that in terms of how Rand, the things that Keating notices and that reassure him, or that, you know, alarm him. I mean, what he's looking for in other people and finds in Frank Hahn with this kind of completely unverbalized mutual awareness.
Because they can't, they're on the phone.
Oh, they can't see me. Okay, great, thank you. What I thought was interesting about that is Peter Keating's personality. That when he first enters the office, he's not comfortable, and he looks around and goes, "How? I'm not an architect. What am I doing here? I'm just an imposter." But then he looks around and says, "Oh, okay, I can compete with these." And I hear that all the time. Like, say, some my writer friends, where they'll say things like, look at all the rubbish that Hollywood is producing. If they can produce rubbish, then I can make a movie, right? So the only way they can actually feel good about themselves if they see others as less than them, right? And so that's his personality, which is where compared to like Rourke's, which is he wouldn't even care what other people what they can do or not can do. It's purely focused on his work and his own ability. It's not socially defined. So that's what I found interesting, is that as soon as he was able to feel contempt for people, then he could. And then Ayn Rand has this amazing line which she goes through the sequences of emotions, and it goes from, I don't know, anxiety to pleasure to contempt, and then he feels love for mankind, which I think is like, wow, right? I just like, it just gives you an access to a way of thinking which is totally alien, at least to me. But it's going, yeah, I think that. Oh, now I can love you, right? But it's based on contempt.
An interesting thing about that point is the end is deeper and is more authentic. So when it comes to artists, you can try to top a mediocre artist or try to better someone else, or you can just dive down deep and be yourself and create from the inside out. So that is a reflection of Rourke by contrast.
One thing I'd like to mention,
I'm sorry, go ahead, whoever speaking.
just a quick thing is, I think that in Ayn Rand's novels, there's the quality of the beginning of her books is better than the ends. And that's not saying that the ends aren't bad or bad, but I think that she put a lot of work into her beginning. And maybe when publishing dates approaches or whatever, she's been working 15 years, it's not as good. So I think the beginning scenes of her books, particularly the Fountainhead, are just extraordinary. The scenes where the characters are introduced, like the Dean scene, is just amazing, and the scene on the steps with Peter Keating and meeting his really extraordinary. That's just the comment I wanted to make.
Yeah, that's a good point. As I recall, there are a few indications, even in the first three chapters, not really major, but sort of little things that Keating says that would indicate that he didn't care about architecture all that much. What he cared about were the social trappings of success and being better than other people, or thought better. And that's what he really craved. That comes out kind. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And he wanted to be an artist.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry about that. Sorry to interrupt. It mentions in the chapter when he goes to school that he awards architecture, and later on in the book, he shows Rourke his paintings, and Rourke's like too late. I think it's heartbreaking. I find it really heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
There's a meeting when he first meets Cameron. I'm sorry, Brackon. A moment in exchange when he shows the drawing to Frank Hahn. I think I don't have the text in front of me, but ask him what Rourke thinks, and he makes some suggestion. Franklin looks at the drawing and says, "Oh yes," and Keating realized that Franklin was pretending for his sake. That is, and just as Keating was pretending for his sake, and that gave him comfort that they were I mean, this is a cognitive thing. It's deeper than, just status. I think it's a. I want to know that I live in a world where we don't have to. We can make up a pretend world that we both live in, but it's safe because we agree.
Well,
So I'm giving an awful echo.
Yes.
I'm okay.
Sorry, I'm going to mute now.
An interesting, a question I have is, when did Rand coin the social metaphysical thing? Because her characters of Mrs. Keating and Keating, they have that social value judgments of other
Are you
people.
talking about the phrase social metaphysics?
Yeah,
Or the idea?
yeah.
Did she actually use that originally, or was it Brandon? Or I don't remember, honestly. I know he used a lot in his psychology writings.
But it came much later, right? Didn't it? But it coins that type of character.
Oh, sure. It was based on Rand's idea, sure.
And
I don't know.
I think the original phrase was her. I could be mistaken, but I'm 90% sure that she came up with it and then Brandon used it later.
Okay. All right. I just don't know. I just remember Brandon used it an awful lot in his psychological writings. Yeah, the thing is, going back to this point about Keating's first meeting with Francon, there's also the point where he suggests, that guy, I don't remember how he's characterized very well, but he's the guy that actually does the work at the company. He designed some bank building or something, and after that, he just wrote on his fame. And, the guy that actually did the hard work,
I think it's Stengel.
Huh?
I think it's Stengel.
Yeah, I think that's his name. Anyway, when that's the Francon, and Keating suggests a change, and Francon agrees, and that here, because the chief architect here, I've changed the drawing he did. He didn't take pride in the fact he thinks he made it better. He just took pride power to change the guy's design. I wasn't sure. I don't know anything about architecture, and I'm amazed that I guess Rand worked a year in an architect's office when she was writing this, but her details, I really should get in the dictionary. Some of the words she uses in regard to architecture, I know in general terms, but there's a point at which Keating, before he meets Francon, he could improve it. He's wasting too much space here, and I don't know. I gathered that his ideas were actually ideas. Am I right about that? I mean, does anyone know the part I'm referring to?
Well,
yeah.
Fountainhead was required reading for young architects in school.
Yeah.
So they would have confirmed that a lot of her ideas were something that were authentic in architecture.
Yeah,
I would guess.
Just referring to Keating's ideas being sensible, I think the idea is not that he's an incompetent architect from perfectly adequately. It's just from the aesthetic standpoint, he's just a complete second-hander, and he can only design things that other people designed thousands of years ago, basically.
And adequate is a relative term compared to the dolts around him.
Well, I mean, he can build buildings that will stay up. He's adequate in that sense, but he's an amateur in every other way.
What's interesting about that scene you're talking about is he analyzes in terms of the technical faults. Like he says, okay, there's some pillars or something like that, but he doesn't give that information to his boss. He gives social information, right? Like he goes, it's more important for you to assert your authority over this man, right? That's how he communicates. He doesn't say, okay, you can actually do this and this. And he uses the word dignity like a code word, right? He'll add dignity because he hears his boss use the word dignity, right? His boss says, it needs more dignity, like, because he doesn't know what else to say. He's just kind of vague, right? Dignity, yes, more dignity. So he puts that code word in, right, where he's talking back, which is if you do this and this, it'll have more dignity, and you'll be able to assert authority, being a bit uppity with you. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, it
Even
was.
even though Frank Kahn himself recognizes that putting in ornamented string courses there will screw up the windows. Even
Okay.
Frank Kahn recognizes that. He's all, won't that screw up the windows?
Yeah.
And he's all, yeah.
Frankon has all these international awards and stuff, right? I mean, he's a big, huge name in architecture. So he must have built something that, as someone said earlier, must have at least stood up.
One of the things that I noticed is, and he will produce his artistic creation, but only without any of the extraneous artistic details. The form has to follow the function. And this is very much the way Ayn Rand wrote her novels. There's nothing extraneous. There's nothing extra. And just because I think this looks neat. Everything is there for a purpose. And that's the way Howard worked with his building.
Everything that you need to know in order to get the story, basically.
Yeah, she also mentioned somewhere that in connection with that form function, or that the building should also be true to the material it uses. And she indicates that a lot of these architects, they use steel, but then they try to cover it up to make it look, classical or Renaissance. Whereas Rourke thought, you're going to use steel. So I thought that was an interesting point also. I don't know. Does anyone remember what I remember vaguely a story about Frank Lloyd Wright reading the book, and did he like it, or does anyone remember that? What his reaction was?
He liked it very much. He thought that she nailed it.
Oh, really? Well, that's good to hear. I couldn't remember. I read so much about Rand over the decades that he's kind of blurring my mind.
Didn't he send her a fan mail?
I don't know. It sounds like I vaguely.
That's her note saying what a great achievement was and how she nailed it.
Right.
But he wouldn't.
For anyone who's interested, can't remember the answer to this question, but we had an article on Ayn Rand and Frank Lloyd Wright on our website if anyone wants to, search for it.
Okay.
Someone did a pretty extensive bit of research on it.
As
Okay,
I recall,
we'll get that link on the Facebook page.
Okay,
as I
yeah,
recall,
I'll find
they
it.
wanted to use. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm just saying I'll find it.
Okay. As I recall, I read it, but they wanted to use some of Frank Lloyd Wright's designs in the movie when they're showing, Rourke's designs. But he wanted such an outlandish high fee, they couldn't afford it. So they had to use somebody else, I guess. But
yes, he also insisted on full.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
That's kind of cheeky for nothing. Novel. Yeah, I've heard some bad stories about him. I don't know if they're true or not, but.
And that was another thing about the movie. Apparently, the building designs that they used wouldn't have stayed up if they were erected in real life. So, to me, that somehow that goes against the philosophy of the book. But I thought it was just a funny story.
By the way, this is apropos. I have the book in front of me. I put some of these bookmarkers in it. I'm sorry, like I said, I don't see any names. So I don't know who said this about Keating going through those emotional transitions when he company. And this is the thing that I've marked. This is after he's feeling insecure, early. Later, he noticed the wrinkles of a gray smock sticking to a pair of shoulder blades over the next table. He glanced about him cautiously at first, then with curiosity, then with pleasure. Keating became himself again and felt his love for mankind. He noticed sallow cheeks, a funny nose, a wart on the receding chin, a stomach squashed against the edge of a table. He loved these sights. What else could these? What these could do, he could do better. He smiled. Keating needed his fellow men. That's a very good paragraph, I think. That he needed his fellow men in the sense that he needed to feel that he was better than they were.
Something
Right,
I also wanted to. I'm sorry, go on.
Oh, well, that stands for a very deep psychological depth in just a brief paragraph.
Right. It's a typical, I think, Rand's best writing. Yeah, plus, I remember that his physical description of Keating, he was quite a handsome guy and very charming. He could just sort of socialize with people very well. So the fact that he took then some of the guys around him obviously made him feel better too. So
Peter Keating.
have you actually known? I'm not looking for names here, but have you ever actually known characters like Peter Keating?
Of course, yeah. Plenty of Peter Keatings in the world. What I think's interesting is is your comment about his appearances. He lives in a world of appearances, right? It's all about like the thought that comes to my mind is you could do the right thing. Maybe you've been in this situation where you could do the right thing, but maybe there's another voice in your head going, "This will look bad," right? It'll have I'm not sure you can imagine that sort of situation. And then you have a choice: do you do the right thing, or do you modify it so it looks better? So whenever you see that sort of thing in any sort of workplace environment where it's and you have to do the right thing, but it doesn't have anything to do with actually doing the job, but you've got to follow those forms. The Peter Keatings of the world is they're very aware of appearance, and they're a genius at it. Like Peter Keating's a kind of genius at that level, and Rourke is a kind of autistic at that level. He doesn't even understand that stuff.
Right.
And
Mark,
with regard to the differences between the two, there's a moment in the second chapter where Keating remembers that Rourke has just been. Sorry, I'm getting an awful echo here. Where Keating remembers that Rourke has just been expelled, and he feels pity for him, and he's very happy that he's able to feel pity for Rourke. And of course, later in the book, we have the exact opposite happening, where Rourke winds up feeling sorry for Keating, and he feels that it's an absolutely horrible feeling, and he never wants to feel that way about anyone again. So I think that highlights the fundamental difference between how the two view humanity and how Rourke has a certain expectation of dignity or of productive ability from his fellow man, and he doesn't like seeing people in a state where they've been reduced to misery as a result of their own failures, whereas Keating, I think, quite enjoys seeing that because it allows him to feel superior.
Well, we see that with both Mrs. Peter Keating especially with Mrs. Keating, where she tells Rourke how sorry she is about him being expelled from the Stanton Institute. And clearly she's happy about it, but she's saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I think there's some number of times in the first 3 chapters, Rourke looks at somebody, but he looks at them directly, and it says, "But they do feel as if they don't exist," which I thought was an interesting point. But it means he's listening, but I don't think he really. Part of the conversation between Keating and Rourke, Keating is kind of self-aware in a way. Or maybe it's after they go inside. And he said, I don't know I forget now. He shows him a design or a sketch or something, and wants his opinion. Rourke starts to give it to him, and Keating says to him outright, "Look, I value your opinion, but I'd follow their advice, not yours, but I value your opinion more." Very interesting dialogue, I thought, where he's saying, I really respect you more than these other guys, but professionally, if they gave me advice, I would ignore you and take their advice.
Patrick.
That's an extremely self-aware act of self-awareness on Keating's part.
Yeah, it is, and I was struck by that. He's not a dummy. I mean, he knows what he is, and there's another point where he says that he felt comfortable around Rourke because Rourke didn't judge him by his status. And the fact that they lived in the same house for 3 years with Mrs. Keating, again, he just wanted other things. He was more interested in the trappings of success than he was in really pursuing his creative. Do you think Keating had that creative ability? I mean, could he have been more like Rourke and said, "Okay, screw this. I don't care about working for Francon"? Did he have the talent or the creative ability to do that, or was he just sort of?
I would say that he did on the basis that Rand didn't believe in innate talent.
I'm sorry, you faded out.
Well, my understanding is that Rand didn't actually believe in innate abilities, so I think she would have argued that if Keating had made different choices and had chosen to pursue his art rather than going into architecture, then he might have been a great painter as opposed to a mediocre architect.
Oh, you don't think Rand put any stock at all in innate creative ability? I've sometimes wondered about that.
I'm not an expert, but I have read a few passages from her where she seems to say that.
One element about the book is the title, The Fountainhead. And it's a spark of creativity, a spark of an idea. It's the light bulb effect.
Right.
And I think she was making a statement that there's people that have that and there's people who don't, and the ones that don't end up like Peter Keating.
No.
I think it's
no.
Everyone, I think everyone has it, but if you betray it, right? If you betray it, then you will be a second-hander, right? That we all have it, and so Peter Keating has that seed in him, but he didn't choose. It's not like you can be good at everything. That's this. It just that spark is not going to be there for you, right? Like, so for Keating, it was going to be art, it was going to be painting, but it's not going to be architecture. So he could never be creative in architecture because that's not where that spark wanted him to go. That's how I see it.
Yeah, I know. I'm thinking. I really like Michael Newberry's art. For people listening, he's here with us. I can barely draw a stick figure, and I tried when I was a kid. I got one of those. This guy used to be on TV with a beard, and he ordered his little art kit with chalk and followed the instructions. And I even screwed that up. And I have to believe that Michael has talent for art, and I don't. And I suspect it's probably inborn. I would think in the same way, not anyone could just be a Howard Rourke in terms of his genius in architecture. I don't know what Rand's ideas. I'm not clear about what Rand's ideas were about this, but
herself as she was a machine, as she put it. She earned her ability to write. Peter had taken, if he had taken Rourke seriously in the beginning and said, you know what, Rourke says you don't do half. If you just focused on that, you could actually develop that talent. But because he doesn't, because he's all about the world of appearance, the world of where it exists in the social realm, and Francon is, and everybody is. I mean, the villains are all in the creative world of how other people think of them and what they can convince one another that they believe. And if they can convince one another that it's true, and they can earn status in that world, that has them not develop their talent. Like Rourke develops his talent, like Rand developed his talent, like Mallory develops his talent. And that's Wining's great flaw, is that he developed the wrong talent.
Let me interrupt for example. Patrick Daly would like to say something.
Thanks. So I just wanted to ask the group, why do you think she chose it as the main character? There are other roles in creating a skyscraper. An architect has a general overview, some sort of integration function, bring it all together, an aesthetic. I've been around dominance, hierarchy, mark in the workplace. We have engineers, creatives, product managers, see these sorts of dynamics between different people. So why do people think she chose architects as a way to kind of explore these dynamics?
Not sure where, but she said that she chose architecture because it's the only profession that because no other profession combines aesthetics with functionality the way that architecture does.
Right.
I hope I'm not misquoting her there, but I think that's what she said anyway.
I believe also business was part of it.
Yeah, Barbara Brandon in the chapter on the Fountainhead in the Passion of Ayn Rand, I was just reading that recently. She said she chose architecture, and Rand probably said something very similar because it combined three things: art, technical skill, and business. And so it's similar to what someone just said, that it combined a number of different fields, and she thought that would be the best representative of what the point she was trying to make.
You can't discount all that, but you should also realize that at the end of the book, or towards the end, as Rourke is said, and there's the outline, the view of New York, the skyscrapers right into the sky, and Ayn Rand was in love with New York as a symbol of man's adapting nature to his needs, and that's all architecture that you see coming in and seeing the skyline. So that was certainly, I think, something to do with it.
Great point.
Yeah.
Also, I think she said somewhere that she would have liked to be an architect. That was like one of her dreams. I guess we can't all be everything we want to be, right? And but I remember reading somewhere that she would have liked to be an architect. She wanted to be a writer. She wanted to be an architect. I'm not sure what else she wanted to be, a philosopher. So I think that might have been one reason. But on another angle, the architect is someone who can do a job that's a bit like a director in a film. It's a very integrating function. It's working with other people, but it's the boss, right? And it's very individualistic, right? It's art coming out of one mind. Where if it was some other role in, it's most jobs involve doing a piece of the puzzle, right? When you're working in making complex things like, I don't know, anything, software, buildings, whatever, you're really just an ant in a colony sort of thing, and that doesn't really go with the whole individualistic philosophy.
Yeah, it's about the architecture thing, but plus got the sort of the permanence of it too. If a building goes up that you designed, you can look at it and say, I designed that building, as opposed to writing books that nobody reads.
Keating, if he had a plan in front of him, he could see where it was screwed up. What he couldn't do was generate a plan from nothing. Like he says, he came to realize that his job, he's supposed to, once he gets his own firm, once he actually starts designing himself, he realizes that his job is to move from a blank piece of paper and to actually create something.
Right.
And that's something that he can't do. He is not the fountainhead in that sense. Whereas the architect has the vision. Everything else flows through. All of the other parts of building a building are the realization of what the architect envisions.
To design a bad building can really stick out. I remember I lived in Hollywood for like 20 years. I don't know if you've ever been to Hollywood, but it's on Melrose near Los Angeles. They call it the blue, I would call it the blue monstrosity, but it just rises up out of nowhere, and it's this kind of opaque blue glass, and it's awful. It's just ugly.
That's the design center in Beverly Hills. That's what it is.
It sounds like a well-turned theater.
But I remember thinking, I drove by it all the time. I didn't think it was in Beverly Hills. I thought it was more in the southern Hollywood.
No. It's Melrose, and it's on the border with Beverly Hills. It's a close.
Okay, my mistake then. Yeah, we're talking about the same thing. And I just looked at that building and thought, how could anyone design that and not think this is the ugliest goddamn thing I've ever seen? I mean,
I believe
it's
that's
a blue glass skyscraper, and there's just nothing there. It's just nothing.
like a block.
You know, Michael, for a moment I thought you were going to say that's my house, which would have been a lot funnier.
Anyway, it must be very satisfying. I mean, it's like a writer like Rand, you get a book out or a important article, you take a certain amount of pride in it, even if nobody reads it. But I would think it must be an immense satisfaction if you're an architect and actually build something that's functional. And by the way, I know we're getting short on time. I just want to mention one other thing, and whether I just was imagining this. It's the beginning of this speech by at the Institute, the commencement speech. What's his name? I just name slipped my mind. The architect guy. But anyway, Frank, yeah. And he starts off talking about the eternal entities. He actually uses the term entities of beauty. I forget what the other is, but it reminded me very much of the three Platonic forms. And I was wondering at that point if Rand was taking a swipe of Plato. We all know that she was not a great fan of Plato. But do you remember that part? It's at the very beginning, I think, of chapter 2.
Certainly. Certainly. That's my vote.
So you think it was you think it was explicitly a reference to the three Platonic forms?
George, I think that had really came more from medieval scholasticism. That's a phrasing or a term that was used. So it distinctively Plato as much as opposed to Aristotle. It's kind of, some, in terms of philosophical influence, some mix.
I thought it was the symbols of morality plays. You have Hope come in and she parades herself, and then you have Virtue come in and they parade themselves.
That could be. I mean, it was a very influential. It probably originated with Plato, the Neoplatonists. But I thought it was interesting that Frankon was depicted as portraying these eternal forms as something external to human beings. I was wondering if that was your point there. These are things we must conform to.
Well, George, I've heard people using that phraseology, and Charles Murray used it in one of his books. It was never clear to me whether by entity they meant or Platonic form that's out there, or just a concept. And that's because people aren't clear about that distinction very often to begin with.
One thing that caught my eye, and I thought, I wonder what she was thinking when she did this. When Frankon gets up, he talks about these three, I don't know if he calls them forms, but then the second time he uses entities, he breaks off the word, and she spells it E-N-T-I, and then maybe there's a ... after it or something, but that he didn't actually say the word the second time. Now, something had to be going through her mind when she wrote that line. Why didn't he just didn't say entities again? Was he kind of pulling back? Did anyone else notice that?
Given the person who was actually saying it, it's entirely
Latin or Greek. I'm guessing it's Latin or Greek. He's being fancy. That's my guess.
Okay. Well, that could be.
I was going to say, given the person who was actually saying it, it's entirely possible that it doesn't mean anything. I can see Ayn Rand sitting down and deciding, I'm going to have this character say something that sounds fancy, but is really meaningless when you actually try to analyze it. And here's why that break-off is, to me, that indicates that he is kind of reading off a script in his mind, and he's not really thinking about what he's saying. So he kind of has this skip where it's like, wait, what was the word I was trying to pronounce there? And then he kind of continues on from there. Like,
that's an interesting explanation. I hadn't thought of that. That would explain.
He actually goes, He actually, it's like he's hearing his speech. He's like, yeah. I kind of like that. He's phoning in the speech. He's doing it. I actually think that it is my guess that Rand spent a fair amount of time crafting that speech to make it both absolutely meaningless, just words spoken, and to use the terms of Platonic philosophy, the good, the true, and the beautiful, or the love and truth and beauty.
Right.
That she was really trying to say that this whole philosophy is fundamentally empty. But that it's my guess that she chose the words that she put into Guy Fawkes' mouth relatively carefully so that he would be an adequate representation of the absolute emptiness of the aesthetic of the field that she would criticize.
So I looked it up.
Are we there?
He got cut off.
All right, folks.
Okay, well, I know we're over
It
time.
is 3 minutes.
Are we supposed to end right on
after
that?
4. We can, so people, if you have things to do, you can go ahead and hop off. For those of you who would like to continue the conversation, I can stay on GoToMeetings and you can continue talking, or you can take it over to the Facebook reading group. So with that, if you'd like to continue discussing, that's you can do that. Those who have to go, don't feel bad. We'll see you next Saturday, hopefully. And thank you all for joining. It was a great first session.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I really enjoyed this, and it's a pleasure to learn something too from people who have actually read Rand instead of people who have never read her claim what she said.
All right, thanks, George. David here. I do have to go, but
I have to run too. I have
great discussion.
I need to get to a restaurant and do something.